They thought the cameras weren't rolling. They thought the microphones were off, but the world heard every word. In a private meeting worth $7 billion, a Dubai sheikh leaned back in his chair, smirked, and called the Texas CEO sitting across from him a monkey. He said it in Arabic, laughing with his advisors, convinced she wouldn't understand. But what he didn't know was that she spoke the language fluently, and that single word would soon cost him everything. Because, in less than a week, his empire would tremble. His name would be dragged across global headlines, and the woman he mocked would go down in history as the CEO who canceled the deal that shook the oil world to its core. But before the world saw the headlines, before that clip went viral, something powerful happened behind closed doors. A battle of dignity, culture, and quiet power that began long before the insult ever left his lips. And tonight, you're about to hear that story. Welcome, my friend, wherever you're watching from, whether it's Houston, London, Spain, or Dubai itself. Take a moment and drop your city and the time in the comments below. Because this isn't just a story about oil or business. It's about what happens when silence meets arrogance and refuses to bow. If you believe that respect has no color, no gender, and no price tag, hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss the next story, one that will remind you how truth always finds its way to the surface. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 2 weeks before the insult that changed everything, Dr. Amara Kingsley stood on a stage in Abu Dhabi, a black woman in a white suit. Her presence radiated calm authority, not loud, not boastful, but steady. Behind her, a massive screen glowed with her company's name, Kingsley Energy Solutions. For years, she'd been dismissed, doubted, and disrespected. Yet here she was, the first black CEO to lead a US-based renewable oil tech firm into global negotiations. Her idea was bold. Too bold, some said. A system that could refine crude oil with 70% less carbon waste. Cleaner, faster, cheaper. She didn't just want to change the way oil was processed. She wanted to change the power dynamics behind it. When she finished speaking, the room stood still. Not everyone clapped. Not everyone smiled. But those who listened understood. This woman wasn't asking for permission. She was announcing a new era. A few hours later, a man approached her team with an invitation sealed in gold. It bore the insignia of Sheikh Rashid Al Mansour, one of the richest oil magnates in the Middle East, known for his opulent lifestyle, ruthless business style, and infamous temper. He wanted to meet her personally in Dubai to discuss a $7 billion collaboration deal. The world would have called it an honor, but to those who knew him, it was a test, a game of pride wrapped in politics. Her COO, Marcus Green, warned her gently, "They say he doesn't negotiate with women, and he definitely doesn't respect them." Amara smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time someone taught him how respect is earned. She accepted the invitation. 2 days later, the jet touched down in Dubai. The skyline shimmered with gold and glass, but the air around her felt heavy. Every handshake was polite but hollow, every smile faintly strained. She noticed the way men looked past her, not at her, the way they said her name with forced courtesy, like it tasted wrong on their tongues. And when they spoke Arabic, the language she'd studied for 5 years, she heard everything they thought she didn't. American woman. Bold, one whispered. Black skin, sharp tongue. Another said quietly, "Let's see how long she lasts." Marcus saw her expression tighten. "You good?" he asked softly. Amara nodded. "Not yet. Let them speak freely." Her voice carried no anger, only calculation, the calm of a storm still waiting for wind. That evening, she stood before the grand palace where the meeting was set to take place. Gold pillars, marble floors, guards in pristine uniforms. Inside waited the man everyone feared to cross, Sheikh Rashid himself. He extended his hand lazily, eyes cold, lips curved in something that looked like a smile. Dr. Amara. Kinsley? He mispronounced, dragging her name like a joke. Kingsley, she corrected, her tone even. He chuckled. Ah, in my country, we don't take orders from women. She paused, then met his gaze with quiet fire. Then you've been in the wrong country for too long. The room fell silent, and for the first time, Sheikh Rashid realized this woman wasn't here to impress him. She was here to redefine what power looked like. He looked at her as if she didn't belong in the same room, as if her presence was a mistake the universe forgot to correct. The golden conference table stretched between them, polished to a mirror shine, but it reflected two very different kinds of power. On one side sat Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansur, his robe immaculate, his eyes sharp with the quiet arrogance of a man never told no. On the other sat Dr. Amara Kingsley, calm, poised, her posture straight, her silence deliberate. He thought her silence was weakness. He had no idea it was strategy. Rashid leaned back, pretending to study her proposal. Though everyone in the room could see he wasn't reading, he was performing. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, looked at his advisors, and in fluent Arabic muttered, "They send us Western puppets now. Even the clowns come dressed in suits." Laughter rippled across the table. His nephew joined in, a hollow echo of his uncle's cruelty. Amara didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, her eyes tracing the edges of her own report as if memorizing every number. Only Marcus, seated beside her, noticed her right hand, the one resting under the table, slowly curl into a fist and then relax again. She had heard every word. She understood every insult. Rashid switched to English, pretending civility. "Dr. Kingsley," he said, drawing out the title as though it were a joke. "Your technology is interesting, but let's be honest. A fantasy. Do you really believe a woman from Texas can revolutionize the oil industry?" There it was. The challenge, dressed as curiosity. A man trying to measure how far her confidence would bend before breaking. Amara smiled lightly. "I don't believe," she said. "I calculate. And the numbers don't lie." Her calm unnerved him. Men like Rashid fed on fear, not composure. He snapped his fingers at an assistant, ordering tea. "Tell me, doctor, what exactly makes you think you understand oil better than men who've lived and breathed it for generations?" Amara's voice didn't rise. "Because I studied it without entitlement. Because I had to earn every drop of it." For a moment, the room went still. Then Rashid chuckled, but his laugh didn't reach his eyes. In Arabic again, he muttered, "Such confidence from a woman who should be cleaning the floor, not commanding the table." And in that instant, Amara's mind traveled years back, to a time when she actually was cleaning floors. She was 23, working night shifts at an office building in Dallas, while finishing her degree in petroleum engineering. Each night, while others slept, she vacuumed the halls of oil corporations she dreamed of someday leading. The mop was heavy, but her determination was heavier. Her father, a quiet pastor with calloused hands, used to meet her at dawn with coffee in a paper cup. He'd sit beside her on the church steps as the sun rose over the parking lot. "Baby girl," he'd tell her, "dignity doesn't shout. It stands tall in silence. The moment you start begging people to see your worth, you've already given it away. She remembered those words every time someone laughed at her accent, her skin, her gender. And now, in this golden room, those words echoed again, not as comfort, but as armor. Back in the present, Rashid's voice broke through her memory. "So," he said, "if you expect my government to fund this little experiment of yours, what exactly do we gain?" Amara leaned forward. "You gain the future. Cleaner energy. Efficient refineries. Less dependence on outdated systems." She paused. "And maybe, just maybe, a chance to lead the world with integrity instead of intimidation." Rashid's jaw tightened. His nephew snorted. Layla, his niece and translator, lowered her eyes as if embarrassed to belong to this room. Marcus's phone buzzed softly beneath the table. A single text glowed on Amara's screen. "You sure about this?" Her reply came quick. "He's showing the world who he is. Let him talk." And she let him. For the next hour, Rashid paraded his ego across the table like a crown. He interrupted her every 2 minutes. He corrected her even when she was right. He compared her to American reality TV executives and charity mascots. Each insult, though veiled in politeness, was sharp enough to draw blood. But Amara's silence was louder than any argument. Every pause, every patient glance, every composed sip of water. It disarmed the room in ways shouting never could. When she finally spoke, her tone was steady, deliberate. "Your Excellency, leadership isn't about who talks loudest. It's about who listens longest." The translator hesitated, looking at Rashid for permission to repeat it. He nodded stiffly. When the words left the translator's lips in Arabic, they struck the table like a hammer. For the first time, no one laughed. The meeting ended with forced smiles and shallow promises. As Amara and Marcus walked out of the palace conference hall, the sun was setting, gold bleeding into the horizon. Marcus exhaled. "You just stared down a lion and didn't blink." Amara gave a faint smile. Lions only scare those who don't understand cages. That night, she received an invitation for dinner at the Sheikh's estate. "An honor," his secretary said, "for select guests and business elites." Marcus frowned. "You know what he's doing, right? He's testing you." She nodded. "Good. I want him to." The dinner hall was a spectacle. Chandeliers dripping with crystals, servants gliding like ghosts, every plate glimmering under golden light. Amara entered wearing a modest but elegant navy gown, her hair wrapped neatly, her presence dignified but unassuming. She noticed immediately. Women were seated on one side, far from the center table where the men gathered. Her name card waited quietly among the women's section, a deliberate reminder of where she was meant to belong. Without hesitation, she lifted the card and walked toward the main table. Every step clicked like a metronome of rebellion. When she pulled out a chair beside the sheikh, silence swallowed the room. Rashid looked up slowly. "Dr. Kingsley," he said, voice dripping with sugar, "perhaps you're not familiar with our customs." "I am," she replied softly, "but I'm also familiar with the verse that says, 'We created you from a single soul, male and female, so that you may know one another.'" Her Arabic was flawless, not the hesitant accent of a tourist, but the confident cadence of someone who understood every syllable. The verse hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Every man at the table froze. Layla's eyes widened in astonishment. Even the sheikh's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat. Then he forced a laugh. "You quote the Quran?" he said, almost incredulous. Amara met his gaze. I quote truth, wherever it's written. No one dared speak for several seconds. The clatter of silverware resumed slowly, timidly, as if the room itself feared making noise. The rest of the meal unfolded in strange quiet. Rashid avoided direct conversation, suddenly unsure how to handle a woman who not only matched his intellect, but spoke his sacred tongue with reverence and command. Layla, watching closely, felt something shift inside her. Admiration, perhaps, or guilt. When the dinner ended, Amara rose gracefully and thanked her host in Arabic, her tone courteous but distant. As she turned to leave, she felt a soft touch on her arm. Layla stood there, her expression torn between fear and urgency. "Be careful," Layla whispered. "He doesn't lose gracefully. He will try to humiliate you publicly tomorrow." Amara studied her face, calm as ever. "Then I'll teach him the language of consequences." Later that night, back at her hotel, Amara stood by the window overlooking the desert skyline. The city sparkled below, a kingdom of glass and power built on sand. Marcus entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "You sure you want to go back tomorrow?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I didn't come this far to flinch now." He hesitated. "You think he'll really go that far? Public humiliation?" Amara nodded. "Men like Rashid don't fight battles. They stage them. He wants to prove dominance. But he forgot something." "What's that?" "That I don't play by his rules. I write my own." Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're fearless." "No," she said, turning toward the window again. "I'm just tired of pretending smallness is grace." Her reflection in the glass looked like 2 people, the girl who once cleaned floors and the woman who now walked marble halls. Between them was the bridge her father built with his words. Morning came with tension thick in the air. Across Dubai, whispers had already spread about the woman who quoted the Quran at the Sheikh's table, about her calm defiance, about the quiet power she carried like a crown she never had to polish. By the time she arrived at the palace again, even the guards greeted her with hesitant respect. Inside, Rashid was preparing a televised forum, The Future of Oil and Energy, a public event meant to showcase his empire's alliances. But to him, it was more than publicity. It was a stage for payback. Amara didn't know exactly what he planned, but she felt it, that subtle tremor in the air that always comes before arrogance exposes itself. As the minutes passed, Layla's warning echoed in her head. He will try to humiliate you publicly tomorrow. And deep inside, Amara knew that would be his final mistake. Because there are battles fought with anger, and there are wars won with patience, and patience she had mastered. My friend, if this story has already pulled you in, if you've ever watched someone underestimate you, if you've ever had to stay silent while arrogance laughed, then you understand what's coming next. Because silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. And Amara Kingsley was ready. Tell me in the comments, have you ever faced someone who doubted you simply because of who you are? I want to know your story. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because what happens next will leave you breathless. When power mocks dignity, there's always a reckoning. And it's closer than anyone in that palace could imagine. It was supposed to be a celebration of power, not a spectacle of shame. Every chandelier glistened, every lens pointed toward the stage, every headline was waiting to be written, and Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour stood at the center of it all, certain the day would belong to him. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. It gives arrogance a microphone, only so the whole world can hear it fall. The International Press Forum was televised live across the Middle East and streamed to audiences in Europe and America. Banners behind the podium read, "The Future of Global Energy Partnerships." Rows of dignitaries filled the seats: oil executives, ministers, scholars, investors. And in the front row sat Dr. Amara Kingsley. Her company's name glowed on the presentation list: Kingsley Energy Solutions, marked as under evaluation. She wore a black suit this time. Simple, strong, unapologetically dignified. Her calm composure contrasted with the opulent chaos around her. Gold chairs, velvet curtains, cameras buzzing like restless insects. When Sheikh Rashid took the stage, the crowd rose in applause. His smile was a politician's smile. Polished, hollow, rehearsed. He began his speech in English, voice booming through the hall. "Today," he declared, "we celebrate progress, we celebrate innovation, and we decide who among our partners will help lead us into the future." The audience clapped. Cameras flashed. Then he paused, eyes sliding toward Amara with deliberate slowness. "But of course," he continued, "not all who come bearing promises are ready for leadership. Some are merely ambitious." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Amara remained still, eyes forward, hands folded in her lap. Rashid gestured to a large digital screen where her company's proposal was displayed. "This," he said, "is Kingsley Energy's plan. It claims to reduce refinery emissions by 70%. An impressive number for a dream." He turned to the audience, chuckling. "Perhaps next year they will promise to make oil from the wind." A few men laughed loudly, eager to please him. Layla's face tightened. Marcus's jaw flexed. But Amara didn't move. He switched languages into Arabic, assuming few outside the region would understand. "Do you know what America sends us now?" he said, voice heavy with disdain. "Puppets, clowns. They dress them up and call them leaders." He let the silence linger, then added the words that would stain his legacy forever. "A monkey can press a button, but it cannot lead an empire." The hall erupted in laughter. Ugly, thunderous, heartless laughter. Reporters smiled nervously, pretending not to understand. Layla froze, horror washing across her face. Marcus clenched his fists under the table, knuckles white, every instinct screaming to stand up, to shout, to defend her. But Amara did not react. Not a flinch, not a blink. Only that same faint smile, quiet, unreadable, almost disarming. To the cameras, it looked like composure. To those who knew her, it was restraint. The kind born not of weakness, but of unshakable strength. She had been here before, not in palaces or televised forums, but in boardrooms where men spoke over her. In classrooms where professors doubted her. In life where silence had always been her sharpest weapon. And as Rashid laughed into his own echo, her mind traveled back to another time, another humiliation. She was 25, sitting in a cramped office at a Texas refinery company, clutching a folder filled with blueprints and data she'd worked on for months. Her supervisor, an aging white man named Carl Benton, looked at her from behind a cluttered desk. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Amara," he said, "you're smart, no doubt about that. But you make people uncomfortable." She frowned. "Uncomfortable?" He leaned back, smirking. "You don't laugh at the jokes. You correct your seniors. You talk like you belong in rooms that weren't built for you." "I belong in every room I walk into," she said quietly. He chuckled. "That's exactly what I mean. You'll never make it far like that. The world doesn't like women who think they're equal." That day, she walked out of his office without a word. But in her heart, a seed of fire had taken root. She learned something vital. Comfort was a cage for cowards, and she refused to live in one. Now, in the Grand Hall of Dubai, surrounded by cameras and laughter, she remembered that lesson. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was the sharpening of her blade. Rashid mistook her calm for defeat. He continued his performance, speaking about tradition, about respect for order, about knowing one's place. Each word dug his grave deeper. When his speech ended, polite applause filled the room. He smiled triumphantly, nodding as if he'd won something. The photographers rushed toward him, flashes bursting like small explosions. Amara rose slowly from her seat, smoothing her jacket. She met his gaze across the room, steady, unbroken, fearless. He smiled mockingly, lifting his chin in arrogant dismissal. Then, in perfect Arabic, her voice carried clear and low through the hum of reporters. "Be careful with your words, Sheikh," she said. "You might be speaking to the woman who ends your empire." The sentence fell like thunder in a church. Every conversation in the room stopped. Every head turned. Even those who didn't understand Arabic felt the shift, the air tightening, the weight of something historic happening in real time. Rashid frowned, confused. "What did she say?" he asked his translator. The young man hesitated, face draining of color. "She said," his voice trembled, "you might be speaking to the woman who ends your empire." Rashid's smile faltered, just for a moment. But in that sliver of silence, the world seemed to tilt. Amara turned and walked away. No rush, no anger, just the quiet stride of inevitability. Outside, the desert wind met her like an old friend, warm, dry, steady. Marcus caught up to her at the entrance. "Amara," he said, voice shaking with fury. "He called you." "I know," she said. "You're not angry?" She looked at him, calm and unreadable. "Anger would make it about me," she said softly. "But this isn't about me. It's about everything he represents." He shook his head. "You should have said something back there." "I did," she replied. "He just hasn't realized it yet." Marcus exhaled hard. "You think he'll understand?" "No," she said, glancing at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "But the world will." Later that evening, news networks replayed the forum across the globe. Clips of Rashid's speech filled the internet. At first, reporters downplayed it. A misunderstanding, a cultural miscommunication. But within hours, translations of his Arabic comments began to circulate online. Activists, journalists, and everyday viewers started calling it what it was: humiliation, racism, misogyny, broadcast live. People began sharing clips of Amara's calm face during the insult. Tweets flooded in. "The strength in her silence is louder than any protest." Others wrote, "That smile! That's what dignity looks like under fire." By midnight, it Kingsley Power trended across social media. But Amara didn't post. She didn't speak. She simply watched, patient, deliberate, waiting. Meanwhile, inside his palace, Sheikh Rashid's confidence began to curdle into unease. He had ruled by fear for decades, but this was different. It wasn't rebellion that scared him. It was indifference. Her silence wasn't submission. It was prophecy. He slammed his hand on the table. "What is she planning?" he demanded. No one answered. Even his advisors seemed unsure whether to speak. Layla stood by the corner, silent, conflicted. She had seen power her whole life, the kind that demands obedience, but never the kind that commands respect through silence. Amara's words echoed in her mind like a hymn. "You might be speaking to the woman who ends your empire." And for the first time, Layla believed it. Days passed. The insult that was meant to humiliate had begun to backfire spectacularly. Western media picked it up, demanding statements. Investors grew nervous. Human rights groups called for boycotts. Every clip, every headline carried Amara's image, poised, strong, unshaken. Rashid called emergency meetings to control the narrative. He ordered statements of clarification, blaming translation errors. But the internet had already judged him, and judgment, once viral, never forgets. Amara watched quietly from Houston, surrounded by her team. Marcus was glued to the screen, shaking his head. He's losing it. Look at this headline. The Sheikh who mocked the future. Amara didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just whispered, almost to herself. Words have roots. You can't unspeak them once they touch the soil. Her father's voice echoed again in her memory. Dignity doesn't shout. It stands tall in silence. And that's exactly what she was doing, standing tall while the noise consumed her enemies. The next morning, she received a call from Layla. Her voice was trembling. He's furious, she said. He blames everyone, but mostly you. Amara's tone was steady. Then he's finally learning accountability. You don't understand, Layla whispered. He's planning something drastic. A public statement, maybe worse. He wants to destroy your credibility before you destroy his. Amara paused. Thank you for telling me. Layla hesitated. Why aren't you angry? Amara smiled gently. Because anger is short-term fuel. I'm building something that lasts longer than fire. And so, as the Sheikh scrambled to repair his image, Amara prepared her next move. Not with fury, but with precision. Not with vengeance, but with vision. Because power that depends on fear dies when people stop being afraid. But power rooted in integrity? That lives forever. The woman he called a monkey was about to become the symbol of a movement, and the empire he built on pride was about to crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. But he didn't know that yet. He still thought he controlled the story. My friend, think about this. How many times have powerful people mocked those they thought beneath them, never realizing they were standing on the edge of their own downfall? How many times has silence been mistaken for weakness, only to roar later as justice? Have you ever been underestimated, told you're not good enough, smart enough, or deserving enough, and proved them wrong in your own way? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you haven't yet, subscribe right now. Because the next part of this story, when silence turns into power, will make you believe that dignity isn't passive. It's a storm that waits for its moment. The Sheikh thought he had won that day, but he had only lit the match that would burn his empire to the ground. Power isn't loud. It doesn't shout, threaten, or beg to be seen. Real power moves in silence, rearranging the world while arrogance is still busy talking. When the world saw the clip of Sheikh Rashid calling Dr. Amara Kingsley a monkey, they gasped. When they saw her calm, wordless smile in response, they applauded. But what they didn't see, what no camera captured, was what happened after the lights went out and the microphones turned off. That night, as the desert slept, Amara did not. She sat in her hotel room overlooking the endless sprawl of Dubai, the city glowing like a kingdom built on pride. Her phone buzzed non-stop, news alerts, interviews, statements, investors panicking, media begging for her comment. But she ignored them all. Her focus was razor-sharp. Her silence, still her greatest weapon, was about to become the calm before a global storm. She opened her laptop and began typing. Emails to her legal team, instructions to her PR division, encrypted messages to her contacts in Washington, London, and Geneva. By midnight, the chessboard of the oil world had begun to shift, one calculated move at a time. She wasn't just responding to an insult. She was dismantling an empire. Pull every pending partnership tied to Al Mansour Holdings, she said to her chief counsel on a video call. Freeze all research licenses connected to his refineries, and prepare a statement, but not yet. Timing is everything. The lawyer hesitated. Amara, that's billions in contracts. You're sure? Her tone was cold, precise. I'm not interested in contracts built on contempt. Across another call, her public relations head whispered urgently, The press wants your comment on the video. Do you want us to deny or confirm? Amara looked out the window, the night wind brushing the glass. Neither, she said softly. Let them talk. The more they speculate, the louder their guilt becomes. She hung up, exhaled, and closed her eyes for a moment. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but her mind was fire. Because she knew something Rashid didn't. Power doesn't respond. It repositions. By dawn, her silent repositioning had begun to ripple through the global energy world. Several American partners received withdrawal letters. European investors, sensing the shift, began to question their ties to the Sheikh's company. And quietly, in the background, allies at the World Energy Council started drafting an ethics review, one that would shine a light brighter than any camera ever could. Rashid had used the press to humiliate her. She was about to use diplomacy to erase his credibility. As the sun rose, Marcus entered her suite, holding 2 cups of coffee. His face was tired, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. You haven't stopped since yesterday, he said softly. You should rest. Amara didn't look up. Rest is for the satisfied. I'm not there yet. He sat across from her, watching her work. Contracts, emails, international calls. Each click of her keyboard felt like a hammer striking stone, the careful construction of something unbreakable. After a long silence, he asked, You're not angry, are you? Amara paused. Then she turned slowly toward him. Anger? She repeated. No, Marcus. Anger is temporary. I'm building something permanent. Accountability. He stared at her, realizing then that she wasn't just fighting a man. She was fighting a mindset, centuries old, global in scale, comfortable in its prejudice. She wasn't trying to win a feud. She was rewriting the definition of respect. By mid-morning, her allies began calling back. First was Ambassador Karen Holt from the United Nations Energy Council. Amara, she said, I've seen the footage. It's disgraceful. If you want a formal statement of support, we'll have it ready by tomorrow. I appreciate that, Amara replied, her voice calm but deliberate. But make it official only after I move first. Let him underestimate me one last time. Then came a call from Geneva, from the director of the Global Renewable Initiative. Dr. Kingsley, he said in a thick French accent, if you withdraw your partnership with Al Mansour, you'll have our full endorsement for the next international bid. Amara smiled faintly. Then it's settled. I'll give him back his insult, wrapped in diplomacy. That evening, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. It read simply, We need to talk. He's worse than you think. The message was from Layla Al Mansour, Rashid's own niece. When they spoke later that night, Layla's voice trembled. He thinks he's untouchable, Amara. You don't know what goes on behind those walls. Money, bribes, silencing critics. It's all buried under his foundation. Amara listened silently. Layla continued, I can't stay silent anymore. I want to help you show him he's not untouchable. Why risk everything? Amara asked quietly. Because silence makes me an accomplice, Layla replied, and I'm tired of being loyal to shame. That night, Layla sent her a file, encrypted, protected, detailed. Inside were hundreds of documents, secret offshore accounts, falsified audit reports, bribery evidence connecting Rashid's empire to political corruption across 3 continents. Amara opened the file slowly. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply whispered, Justice doesn't need noise, just proof. The next morning, Kingsley Energy's communications team assembled online. They expected instructions to respond to the scandal. Instead, Amara gave them something entirely different. We're not defending ourselves, she said firmly. We're defining the standard. Her head of communications frowned. You mean... I mean tomorrow morning, she said. We release an official statement announcing that Kingsley Energy is withdrawing from the Al-Mansur partnership, effective immediately, due to cultural incompatibility and ethical concerns. The team gasped. That's a $7 billion deal, Amara. You'll lose everything. No, she said. He will. Because what they didn't realize, what Amara had been preparing for, was that every dollar in that deal was tied to influence, reputation, and confidence. And when reputation collapses, money follows. The press release went live the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock Dubai time. It read, After careful evaluation, Kingsley Energy Solutions has decided to cancel its pending $7 billion joint venture with Al-Mansur Holdings due to significant cultural incompatibility and ethical misalignment. We remain committed to global partnerships that reflect transparency, equity, and mutual respect. No accusations, no outrage, just facts, sharp, precise, devastating. The statement went viral within minutes. Global markets trembled. Oil analysts called it the most calculated corporate power move of the decade. By noon, Al-Mansur Holdings' stock had plummeted by over $3 billion. Banks froze short-term credit lines. European partners quietly suspended pending deals. The man who once laughed on stage now found himself at the center of a storm that no wealth could silence. Inside Rashid's palace, chaos erupted. Phones rang off the hook. Advisors shouted over each other. Reporters camped outside the gates. Rashid slammed his hand against the marble table, veins bulging. "What do you mean they canceled the deal?" he bellowed. "Find her. Apologize. Fix this." But no one knew how to fix it, because this wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a collapse. The same arrogance that made him untouchable had now left him exposed. His translator, pale and trembling, whispered, "Sir, the Americans have frozen your pending permits. The British regulators are demanding audits, and the UN just released a statement on corporate ethics." Rashid stared at the screen, his face plastered across global headlines. Next to the woman he had mocked. Kingsley cancels $7 billion deal, dignity over dollars. The Sheikh's fall, when prejudice costs $3 billion overnight. He felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. Meanwhile, Amara sat in her Houston office, surrounded by her team, watching the markets ripple in real time. Her face remained composed, eyes reflecting both calm and consequence. Marcus turned to her, awe in his voice. "You just made the most powerful man in Dubai kneel without saying a word." Amara looked up slowly. "No," she said. "He kneeled to his own reflection. I just held up the mirror." The room fell silent. Moments later, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Layla. He's losing control. Thank you for doing what none of us could. Amara typed her reply carefully. Change always begins with one person who decides not to look away. By the end of the day, the ripple had become a wave. Media across the world praised her move. News anchors called it a masterclass in corporate ethics. Students quoted her lines on social media. Women across the globe began using her image as a symbol of resilience, standing calm amid chaos. And yet, Amara stayed silent. No interviews, no speeches, just action. Because she didn't need to tell the world what she'd done. The world was already talking for her. That night, she finally allowed herself to rest. She stood by her office window, city lights flickering below, the skyline of Houston glowing in quiet pride. Marcus entered with a gentle smile. It's done. You did it. Amara shook her head. No, Marcus. We started it. He tilted his head. What do you mean? This isn't just about him, she said. It's about the system that lets men like him exist unchecked. It's about the arrogance that hides behind power, the silence that excuses injustice. She turned to face him, her voice soft but steady. We didn't burn his empire. We exposed its cracks. The rest will crumble on its own. Marcus exhaled slowly. You really think it's over? She smiled faintly. Oh no, this is only the beginning. And somewhere across the ocean, inside his golden palace, Sheikh Rashid sat alone. His phone buzzed endlessly with missed calls from investors and journalists. But he didn't answer. For the first time, the man who once commanded nations could no longer command respect. He stared at the television, at Amara's face frozen on the screen, and heard her words echoing from memory. Be careful with your words, Sheikh. You might be speaking to the woman who ends your empire. Now he understood. My friend, have you ever seen someone try to destroy another person, only to watch their own arrogance destroy them instead? Have you ever witnessed how silence, paired with truth, can bring the mighty to their knees? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever seen karma move quietly, like this? And if you believe that integrity will always outlast power, then make sure you subscribe right now. Because the next chapter, when the fallen finally beg for mercy, will remind you that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. He had never looked so small. Not even the diamonds on his cufflinks could hide the trembling of his hands. Not even the bodyguards standing behind him could mask the fear in his eyes. For the first time in his life, Sheikh Rashid al-Mansour wasn't the man everyone else bowed to. He was the man walking into judgment. The cameras outside the hotel caught every second of it. The black SUVs, the guards in formation, the chaos of reporters shouting his name. The world watched the once untouchable billionaire stride into the marble lobby of the Grand Zayed Hotel, flanked by security and shame. He had called for a private meeting with Dr. Amara Kingsley, the very woman he had humiliated in front of the world. And now, in the court of global opinion, he was the one on trial. Every headline called it the meeting of reckoning. But for Amara, it wasn't about revenge. It was about closure, the kind that doesn't come from shouting, but from silence that cuts deeper than any scream ever could. Upstairs, in a private conference room she had reserved hours earlier, Amara waited. No security detail, no entourage, no lawyers. Just her and a small black device resting on the table. A single click away from ending decades of arrogance. The door opened. Rashid entered, his robe immaculate, his jaw tight with the strain of forced pride. Behind him stood 2 aides and 4 bodyguards. He looked around the room, expecting to find her nervous. But she sat there, legs crossed, posture serene, eyes steady, like the universe had tilted and forgotten to tell him. He broke the silence first. "Dr. Kingsley," he said stiffly, "you've made quite the storm." Amara looked up slowly. "No, Sheikh, you made the storm." "I just built the lightning rod." He frowned, pacing. "The media exaggerates. I was misinterpreted. Cultural misunderstanding, perhaps." She smiled faintly. "The cameras didn't misunderstand you." He stopped. "You think you've won, don't you?" Her voice was soft. "I didn't come here to win. I came to remind you what respect looks like." Rashid's temper flared for a moment, but he swallowed it down. "You've caused me great embarrassment," he said. "My investors are withdrawing. My government demands answers. The deal, it can still be saved. We can repair this." Amara tilted her head. "Repair? Sheikh, you shattered something money can't fix." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Let's be practical. You and I, we both need this partnership. I'll double your contract value. $14 billion. No conditions." She didn't blink. Her tone remained calm, but her words carried the weight of every woman, every person ever told to trade dignity for opportunity. "Money can't buy dignity," she said in flawless Arabic. "And dignity is the only currency I trade in." The room went still. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably, as if her words had reached into their chests. Rashid blinked. "You speak Arabic." Amara's voice didn't waver. "I always did. You just never cared to listen." He tried to recover, his voice rising. "You think you can destroy me with words? I control refineries in 8 countries. Governments bend for me. My name built this skyline." She leaned forward slightly. "Then why are you standing here, trying to convince me not to take it away?" He froze. For the first time, the balance of power was visible. Not in money, but in presence. She no longer existed in his shadow. He was standing in hers. Amara reached toward the table and tapped a small black button on the device before her. Instantly, a familiar voice filled the room. His voice. The sound of his laughter from the forum. The arrogance in his tone. The words that had gone viral across every screen on Earth. "A monkey can press a button, but it cannot lead an empire." Rashid's face drained of color. He stumbled back as if struck. "You recorded me?" Amara shook her head. "No, the cameras in your palace did." Silence filled the room. A heavy, echoing silence. The kind that exposes men who've built entire kingdoms on fear. He turned to his guards, voice trembling. "Leave us!" They hesitated, but he barked louder. "Leave!" The doors closed behind them. When they were alone, he slumped into the chair across from her. "I never meant to insult you personally," he muttered. "You must understand. Politics, pride. It's complicated." Amara watched him for a long time before replying. "You said those words because you believed them. That's not politics, Sheikh. That's prejudice." He rubbed his forehead, shaking his head. "Please, I will issue a public apology. I'll say it was mistranslated." She smiled sadly. "Apologies are for mistakes. This was character." As the minutes passed, the man who had once owned skyscrapers and silenced nations began to crumble before her eyes. He looked older now, smaller, deflated. The world outside was moving faster than his pride could keep up. And Amara knew. That was the true cost of arrogance. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. The screen lit up with notifications, News alerts, global headlines, hashtags spreading like wildfire. Sheikh Kingsley Power. She spoke Arabic. Respect has no color. Millions of people around the world were already watching the story unfold. Video clips of her calm confrontation had begun circulating. Someone had leaked the footage from the security cameras in the hotel lobby. The moment Rashid walked in with his entourage, the image of Amara sitting still, fearless, unshaken. It spread faster than oil fire. The hashtags turned into movements. Women in boardrooms posted messages of solidarity. Men in politics publicly condemned his comments. Universities invited Amara to speak about dignity in leadership. And journalists across every continent used the same phrase: the woman who redefined power. Inside that quiet room, Rashid's phone began vibrating non-stop. He glanced at it once, his advisors, his lawyers, his investors, all messaging at once. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at her. "What do you want from me?" he whispered finally. Amara leaned back, her expression unreadable. "I want you to understand what you traded away." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You had everything. Wealth, empire, legacy. But you built it on fear and ego. And fear," she said slowly, "has an expiration date." He clenched his jaw. "You think this ends me? I will recover. My money?" She interrupted gently. "Your money will outlive your name. That's the tragedy." He stared at her, unable to speak. Outside that room, the story had already become unstoppable. CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, Reuters, every major network ran the same headline. Dubai Sheikh faces global backlash. After racist comment, U.S. CEO cancels $7 billion deal. The footage from the forum, where he had laughed, mocked, and degraded her, replayed side by side with her poised, silent reaction. Viewers compared the two. Arrogance versus grace, noise versus control. And in that comparison, the world saw what true strength looked like. Talk shows dissected her calm demeanor, calling it a masterclass in emotional intelligence. Editorials labeled her the face of ethical capitalism. Even heads of state tweeted in her support. And Rashid's empire began to implode faster than anyone predicted. Banks suspended his lines of credit. Investors withdrew their capital. Several oil-rich nations quietly distanced themselves from his company. The same world that once bowed to him now pointed fingers in disgust. But Amara didn't celebrate. She didn't post statements or attend interviews. She simply watched the storm from a distance, composed as ever. Because this wasn't about gloating, it was about principle, about showing the world that dignity, once mocked, could become the loudest echo of all. Marcus entered her office later that evening. He had been tracking global media all day, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's everywhere," he said. "Every channel, every feed. Even the president's office released a statement." Amara looked up from her desk, her eyes calm. "Good." "You really think he'll step down?" Marcus asked quietly. Amara sighed. "He won't step down because the world tells him to. He'll step down because he can no longer look in the mirror." Meanwhile, back in Dubai, Rashid sat alone in his private study. Lights dimmed, curtains drawn. The phone kept ringing, but he didn't answer. On the television, news anchors debated his downfall. His face filled the screen beside Amara's, the contrast of ruin and grace. His assistant entered cautiously. "Sir, the ministry is demanding your resignation from the Energy Council." Rashid stared blankly ahead. "They've already made up their minds." "Yes," the man whispered, "but they want you to announce it voluntarily, before the world does it for you." Rashid closed his eyes. He could still hear her voice. Money can't buy dignity, and dignity is the only currency I trade in. The words played on a loop in his head, louder than the world outside. He realized then that no amount of power could erase the truth spoken in that one moment. Within 24 hours, the palace issued a statement. Sheikh Rashid Al Mansour has decided to step down from his role as chairman of Al Mansour Holdings and will take a leave of absence from public life. The words were polished, diplomatic, but everyone knew what they meant. The man who once ruled with an iron tongue had been silenced by his own arrogance, and the world had watched it happen in real time. In Houston, Amara sat quietly on her balcony, a cup of tea in hand, the evening sun stretching long shadows across the city. Marcus joined her, holding his phone. "It's official," he said. He resigned. Amara nodded slowly. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, she whispered, "Every empire falls. Some with war, some with words, and some with the truth they tried to bury." Marcus smiled faintly. "You changed everything, Amara." She shook her head. "No. The world was ready for change. I just held the mirror." As night fell, the sky seemed quieter, not because the noise had ended, but because something greater had begun. Across the world, people weren't just talking about Amara Kingsley, the CEO. They were talking about dignity, about equality, about respect, not as a slogan, but as a standard. Her name became a symbol of something far bigger than one insult or one victory. It became the proof that power isn't inherited, it's earned. And once earned through integrity, it can never be taken away. My friend, if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever tried to make you feel small, remember this: silence is not surrender. It's the sound of preparation. When the world laughs at you, let your results answer. When they doubt your worth, let your dignity remind them you were never theirs to define. Tell me in the comments, have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between pride and principle, between money and dignity? What did you choose? And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth doesn't shout, it simply stands, then subscribe right now. Because the next chapter will show you something even more powerful than revenge. Because even when arrogance burns to ashes, the lessons left behind still light the way. Empires rarely fall with explosions. Sometimes they collapse in whispers. Boardroom whispers, legal whispers, quiet signatures that strip power away from the proud. That's how Sheikh Rashid Al Mansour's kingdom ended. Not with war, not with revenge, but with silence that finally demanded to be heard. The headlines that once praised him now read like obituaries for arrogance. Dubai energy mogul resigns amid global outcry. Leadership shift, Al Mansour Holdings announces structural reforms. The woman who changed the language of power. The ripple became a tide, and by the time the world caught its breath, everything that once made him untouchable was already gone. Within months, Rashid's empire began to fracture. His investors withdrew their trust. His name, once a currency of influence, became a cautionary tale whispered across conference halls and corporate corridors. He retreated from the public eye, a king without a crown, a voice that had finally run out of echo. But from those ashes, something remarkable rose. Layla Al Mansour, the same niece who had once whispered warnings to Amara in fear, now stood on the balcony of her uncle's former headquarters, addressing the press. Her scarf fluttered in the morning wind as she spoke into the microphones. "For too long," she said, Our family's name represented intimidation instead of integrity. That ends today. From this moment forward, Al Mansur Energy will stand for transparency, equality, and respect. The crowd erupted in applause. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the gravity of change. And somewhere thousands of miles away, watching from her Houston office, Dr. Amara Kingsley allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Because victory wasn't about humiliation. It was about transformation. And Layla's courage proved that even from poisoned roots, new growth was possible. While the world continued to talk, to dissect, to idolize, Amara moved quietly, as she always had. Awards began to pour in. The United Nations presented her with the Global Integrity Award, recognizing her for unwavering moral leadership in international commerce. The World Energy Council honored her for advancing ethical innovation in the energy sector. And universities from Harvard to Oxford invited her to speak about corporate ethics, women's empowerment, and the new face of leadership. Everywhere she went, cameras followed. Every sentence she spoke became a headline. But fame didn't touch her the way arrogance had consumed Rashid. She accepted each award with grace, thanked her team, and returned to work. When reporters asked her what victory felt like, she said simply, "Victory isn't a feeling. It's a responsibility." Despite the global recognition, she remained grounded in the same values that built her. The same humility that carried her from cleaning offices at midnight to standing on world stages never left her side. But there was one place she hadn't returned to. One place she needed to face to complete the circle. So one quiet Sunday, Amara drove back to her hometown in Texas. The road stretched for miles through the open plains, lined with oak trees that bent gently in the wind. She passed the small diner where she used to study after work, the gas station where her father once filled up their old pickup truck, and finally, the little white church where she grew up. It hadn't changed much. The paint had peeled, the bell tower leaned slightly, but the air still felt like home. As she walked inside, the smell of old hymnals and cedar benches washed over her. She sat in the same pew she'd once shared with her father, the man who had given her her first lesson in dignity. For a long time she said nothing. Then, softly, she whispered into the still air, "You told me to stand tall in silence, Daddy. I stood tall, but I made the silence speak." Her voice broke slightly, but she smiled through it. She wasn't mourning. She was thanking him. The sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows, painting colors across the floor. Red, blue, gold, like blessings poured over her shoulders. In that quiet moment, she felt the weight of everything she'd carried finally lift. Not because she had won, but because she had stayed true. Back in Houston, her office walls began to fill with plaques, medals, and framed newspaper clippings. But among them all, she hung only one quote, written in her father's handwriting, taken from an old note he had once left in her college textbook. "Respect is not a gift. It's a mirror. And when arrogance looks into it, it shatters." Those words became her company's creed. Every employee saw them when they entered the headquarters of Kingsley Energy Solutions. Every new recruit was asked what those words meant to them. And every woman who had ever been silenced found strength in their reflection. Months later, Amara stood before a global audience once again, this time at the World Women in Energy Conference, held in Geneva. Leaders from over 80 countries attended. The hall was filled with women engineers, scientists, CEOs, and young students with eyes bright with ambition. As she approached the podium, The crowd rose in applause that lasted almost a minute. She waited, patient and humble, before speaking. "When I first entered the energy industry," she began, "I was told I didn't belong. That I was too bold, too direct, too different. They said my voice didn't fit the room." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. "But instead of changing my voice, I changed the room." The audience erupted again, but she raised her hand gently for quiet. "I want you to remember something," she said, her tone soft but commanding. "The world doesn't need louder men. It needs wiser women. Women who understand that power isn't about domination, it's about direction. Women who lead not by shouting over others, but by lifting them higher." Every camera in the hall flashed. Every listener leaned forward. But Amara wasn't performing. She was planting seeds, seeds of leadership, courage, and conscience. She ended with a line that would later circle the globe. "Leadership is not the art of being followed. It's the courage to walk alone until others see the path." After her speech, reporters flooded her with questions. Analysts dissected her words, and social media lit up once more with hashtags like "Our Wiser Women," "How's Kingsley Legacy," and "Silence Speaks." But Amara didn't stay for the interviews. She walked out of the hall quietly, heading toward the garden outside, where the evening breeze carried the faint sound of applause fading behind her. Layla joined her there, smiling warmly. "You changed the world," she said. Amara shook her head. "The world changed itself. I just reminded it how." Layla looked thoughtful. "Do you think my uncle understands now?" Amara smiled faintly. Understanding and regret aren't the same thing. But maybe, someday, he'll find peace in both. They stood together in silence for a long time. Two women from opposite worlds, bound by a shared story of courage and consequence. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. And for the first time in months, Amara allowed herself to simply breathe. In the following years, her story became a case study at universities, a lesson in leadership, a parable about ethics. Students debated her decisions, executives quoted her speeches. But the truth was simpler than all the analysis. She had chosen integrity over profit. And the world had listened. She founded the Kingsley Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to educating women in developing countries about renewable energy and business leadership. Through scholarships, mentorships, and training programs, her legacy reached places her name had never been spoken before. Villages in Kenya, universities in India, research centers in South America. And every year, on the anniversary of her speech in Geneva, she returned to that same church in Texas, lighting a single candle for her father. Because even though the world now knew her as a global icon, she still saw herself as the girl who once cleaned office floors and dreamed of a seat at the table. Only now, she wasn't asking for a seat. She was building the table. And so, as the final chapter of her journey unfolded, the world learned something it had forgotten. That quiet strength can shake nations. That silence, when rooted in conviction, can drown out centuries of noise, and that the greatest victories aren't measured in dollars, but in dignity. Her story became a symbol of hope for millions. Proof that justice doesn't always need fury. Sometimes it just needs patience, strategy, and faith. As she once said in her final interview before retiring from public life, "I didn't defeat anyone. I simply refused to become like them." My friend, if this story touched something deep inside you, if you've ever felt underestimated, unheard, or undervalued, remember this: your silence doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it means you're waiting for the right moment to roar. So, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Amara's place? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have fought back in your own way? I want to hear your truth. And if this story gave you chills, if it reminded you that power isn't inherited but earned through integrity, courage, and grace, then subscribe right now. Because there are more stories like this. Stories that remind us that no matter how loud arrogance gets, justice always finds its voice. Because in the end, respect isn't granted. It's reflected. And when arrogance looks into that mirror, it shatters.